The chamber was enormous. It always was. That was the point. The Galactic Conclave had built its grand assembly station to make visitors feel small. The ceiling stretched so high that the top of the room disappeared into shadow. The 12 seats of the elder species curved in a wide arc, each one raised above the floor, so that anyone standing at the center had to look up at all of them at once. The lighting was cold and blue. The air smelled like metal and old decisions. Ambassador Hana Yu had been in this room 14 times. She had stopped being impressed by the third visit. Now she simply found it irritating. She stood at the center of the floor, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture straight, her face calm. She was wearing the dark uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, a small silver pin on her collar, the only decoration she allowed herself. Around her, the 12 representatives of the elder species sat in their high seats and looked down at her the way people look at something they have already made up their minds about. Elder Voss spoke first. He always did. He was tall and pale and had been alive longer than humanity had been traveling in space. His voice was slow and heavy, like something that had never once been in a hurry. He said that the conclave had reviewed humanity's progress report. He said that the review had raised concerns. He said that the concerns were serious enough to require action. Hana waited. Voss reached to his side and activated a display. A long document appeared in the air between them. He told her that humanity's probationary period, the 200-year arrangement under which Earth had been permitted to operate in conclave space, was being extended indefinitely. He told her that Earth's faster-than-light development program was to be shut down and all research materials handed over. He told her that Earth's military fleet was to be reduced to a defensive minimum, and that conclave inspectors would supervise the decommissioning of all vessels above that number. He said this calmly. He said it the way someone reads a grocery list. Hana looked at the document floating in the air. She read the first few lines, then she looked back up at Voss. She asked quietly whether the conclave understood what it was demanding. Voss said that the conclave understood perfectly. He said humanity had shown patterns of behavior that were difficult to predict. He said that an unpredictable species could not be trusted with advanced military and travel capability. He said the conclave was acting in the interest of galactic stability. Hana said nothing for a moment. Then she asked if humanity would have any part in appealing this decision. Voss said no. The decision had already been made. Hana nodded once. She thanked the chamber for its time. She turned and walked out. None of the 12 representatives said anything as she left. Voss watched her go and then turned to speak to the representative beside him, already moving on to the next item on the agenda. The human had been handled. There was other business to attend to. The transport back to Earth took 18 hours. Hana spent most of it sitting at a small table near the window, watching stars that did not move. She did not sleep. She was not angry. Anger was a luxury she had stopped carrying years ago. She was thinking. She was turning the conclave's words over in her mind the way a person turns a strange object in their hands, checking every angle. When the transport docked at Earth's orbital station and she finally made it through the lift down to the surface, it was early morning local time. The sky over the mountains was turning a pale gray-pink. The air was cold and clean. A car was already waiting for her. The command citadel sat deep underground, carved into the rock beneath a mountain range in the center of the Korean peninsula. From the outside, the entrance looked like a utility access point, a plain door in a hillside, no markings, no guards visible. Inside, it was something else entirely. Hana walked through 3 security checkpoints and took 2 separate lifts down before she reached the main operations floor. The room was wide and low-ceilinged and filled with the quiet noise of people working keyboards, voices speaking in short sentences, the hum of machines that never turned off. Screens covered every wall. Maps, data feeds, ship positions, numbers that meant things Hana had spent years learning to read. Commander Jeon-beek was standing at the far end of the room when Hana walked in. Jeon was not a tall woman. She was lean and sharp-featured, with dark eyes that moved like they were always calculating something, always adding things up. She was 44 years old and had been in uniform since she was 19. She wore her rank simply, no medals, no decorations. She did not need them. Everyone in the room already knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Hana crossed the floor and handed her a data chip without saying anything. Jeon took it, plugged it into the reader on the desk beside her. Read the directive in full. It took her less than 2 minutes. Then she set the chip down and was quiet for a moment. Junho Lim was standing 2 steps behind her, the way he always was. He had been her second in command for 11 years. He was steady and careful and trusted her completely, but even he watched her face carefully in that moment, trying to read what was happening behind those dark, still eyes. Jeon looked at the data chip for another second. Then she looked up at Junho. She said, in a voice that was completely flat and completely calm, to tell the fleet to stop hiding. Junho blinked. He asked, all of it. She said yes, all of it. Junho held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned and began giving orders. Hana stood beside Jeon and watched the screens begin to change. New signals were appearing on the maps, dozens of them, then more after that. Ships powering up, one after another in locations that did not appear on any conclave record. Positions scattered across the outer system, behind moons, inside asteroid fields, deep in places where no one had thought to look. Hundreds of ships. Hana looked at the screens, then she looked at Jeon. Jeon was still watching the map. Her expression had not changed. Hana said very quietly that she had always suspected, but seeing it was different. Jeon did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was the same flat, quiet, carrying nothing extra in it. She said that the conclave had been given 200 years to treat humanity fairly. She said they had chosen, every single time, not to. She said that she had simply made sure that, when the day finally came, humanity would be ready. On the screens, the lights kept appearing. The map was filling up. Outside, beneath the mountains, the Earth waited. The Conclave Compliance Fleet left its staging point 3 days after the directive was issued. 40 warships. It was not their largest force, but it was more than enough for what they expected. A show of numbers, a reminder of scale. The kind of fleet you send when you want someone to look at it and quietly decide not to make things difficult. The kind of fleet that had worked, without fail, on every species the Conclave had ever needed to bring into line. The commander of the fleet, a tall, gray-skinned officer named Sorrel, had done this kind of assignment before. He was not worried. He had read the human file. He knew their permitted fleet size. He knew the capability of their ships. He had done the numbers twice, found them boring both times, and spent most of the journey to Earth's solar system reviewing paperwork for his next assignment. He expected this to take a week, maybe less. When the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, his navigation officer said something that made Sorrel look up from his desk for the first time in hours. She said there were contacts on the screen. He asked how many. She did not answer right away. She checked the reading twice. Then she said the number. Sorrel walked to the screen himself and looked. 312 ships. They were arranged across the width of the approach corridor in a formation that his tactical system flagged immediately as unrecognized. Not because it was random, it was clearly deliberate, clearly planned. The system simply had no record of it, no match in any database, no conclave design, no known alien origin, something entirely new built by minds his system had never been asked to study. The ships themselves were wrong too, not wrong in a broken way, wrong in the way that something is wrong when it is much larger and much more capable than you were told it would be. They were angular and dark, built low and wide. with weapon arrays that his sensors counted and then counted again, because the first number seemed like an error. The largest of them, sitting at the center of the formation like a stone dropped in still water, was nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Sorrel stood at the screen for a long moment. Around him, his bridge had gone very quiet. He opened a channel to Earth. The response came from Jeon Beek directly. She appeared on the screen without ceremony. No background designed to impress, no dramatic setting. She was standing in a plain room, her uniform neat, her hands at her sides, her face carrying exactly nothing. Sorrel told her that the compliance fleet had arrived to oversee the decommissioning process, as directed by the conclave. Jeon said she was aware. Sorrel told her that the vessels currently deployed in the approach corridor were in direct violation of the conclave directive and would need to stand down immediately. Jeon looked at him. She said, in a voice so even it was almost gentle, that he had come to take their ships. She said she thought it was reasonable that he should see how many there were. Sorrel said nothing for a moment. Then he asked what she was intending. She said she was not intending anything. She said the fleet would remain where it was. She said the compliance fleet was welcome to continue forward if it chose. She said nothing else. She closed the channel. Sorrel turned back to the screen. 312 ships, unmoving, engines burning at idle, every weapon system, according to his sensors, fully charged and ready. He did not advance. He sent a priority transmission back to the conclave and waited. Deep inside the unbroken asterisk, Wubin Kang was walking the lower engineering deck the way he did every morning, slowly, with his hands behind his back, stopping every few meters to listen to the hum of the ship, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. The unbroken was his, not officially. Officially it belonged to the UEDD and the people of Earth and the chain of command that ran all the way up to Jeon's desk. But Wubin had designed 60% of its non-standard systems, had rebuilt 3 of its main drives with his own hands, and had spent more nights sleeping in the engineering bay than in his actual quarters. The ship knew him. He was certain of it, in the way that people are certain of things they cannot prove. A young technician fell into step beside him and asked if he had heard. The conclave fleet was sitting at the edge of the system, not moving. Wubin said he had heard. The technician asked if he was worried. Wubin thought about it for a moment, genuinely. Then he said no. He said that worried was not the right word. He said that he had spent 14 years building this ship in secret, inside a facility that the conclave thought was a mineral processing station on a dead moon. He said that he had watched his team work in shifts around the clock, year after year, on something they could not tell their families about, something that did not officially exist. He said that they had built the asterisk unbroken, and the 311 ships beside it out of patience, and very long nights, and a deep and quiet certainty that the day would come. He stopped walking and put his hand flat against the wall of the corridor. The ship hummed under his palm. He said that he was not worried. He said he was ready. He said there was a difference. In the intelligence center, 1 deck above, Sora Shin was working through a file she had been building for 9 years. It was not a short file. Every conclave directive targeting human expansion. Every regulation written specifically to slow human FTL development while allowing other species to continue without restriction. Every internal conclave communication, obtained through methods that would have caused a diplomatic crisis if anyone had known about them, discussing humanity as a long-term threat to be managed rather than a civilization to be welcomed. Every decision, every policy, every quiet agreement between conclave members to keep humanity in a box. She had read it so many times she could recite most of it from memory, but she still read it, because there was something important about keeping the truth sharp, about not letting it go soft and distant and abstract. The conclave had not stumbled into mistreating humanity. They had chosen to, carefully, deliberately, over and over again. She thought about releasing the file. She had the authority. Jiyeon had given it to her weeks ago, a standing order to use her judgment on timing. But not yet. Not now. The right moment mattered. She closed the file and watched the tactical screen instead. The 40 conclave ships, sitting still at the edge of the solar system like they had run into a wall they could not see. Taeho Ri's voice crackled over the open fighter channel. He was running a patrol sweep along the outer formation, his small ship threading the gap between two of the larger vessels. He was 26 years old and had grown up under every restriction the conclave had ever placed on humanity. He had never known a time when Earth was free to simply do what it chose. He said, to no one in particular, that he had been waiting his whole life to see something like this. His wingman asked what he meant. Taeho was quiet for a second. Then he said that for his entire life people had told him to be patient. Teachers, officers, diplomats, everyone. Be patient, the situation is complicated, do not do anything that will make things worse. He said he had been patient. He said his parents had been patient. He said their parents before them had been patient. He passed between two warships and came out the other side into open space. The distant sun, a small hard point of light ahead of him. He said that it felt good to finally stop pretending. No one on the channel disagreed. The conclave's emergency message arrived at the Grand Assembly 14 hours after Sorrel's fleet stopped moving. It caused, by every account from species who were present that day, the most disrupted session the chamber had seen in over a century. Several representatives spoke over each other. Two delegations walked out and came back. The debate ran for 6 hours without pause. At the end of it, a vote was called. 2 species voted to negotiate. 3 voted to wait and gather more information. 7 voted for action. Elder Voss, who had cast the deciding vote, said afterward that humanity had revealed itself. He said that the hidden fleet was proof of exactly what the conclave had always feared, that humanity could not be trusted, could not be managed, and could not be allowed to continue unchecked. He said the conclave had been too lenient, too patient, too generous. He said it was time to correct that. No one in the room thought to ask how a species that had been treated the way humanity had been treated, for as long as humanity had been treated that way, had managed to build 312 warships in secret without anyone noticing. No one thought to ask what else they might have missed. That question would come later. By then, it would be too late to matter. The Grand Assembly chamber had never been louder. That was saying something. The chamber had hosted arguments between species that had been enemies for centuries. It had seen delegations walk out, threats issued across the floor, decisions made that had reshaped the borders of known space. But there was something different about this session. Something that did not feel like politics or negotiation or careful maneuvering. It felt like fear dressed up in official language, and fear made noise. Elder Voss sat at the center of the high arc and let them argue for a while. He had already made up his mind. He was simply waiting for the room to exhaust itself. The Threnic representative said that an armed confrontation with humanity was premature. She said the hidden fleet was concerning, but that its existence did not mean humanity intended to use it. She said diplomacy had not yet been fully attempted. The Kalan delegate said the opposite. He said that a species which had secretly built a military force of that size while pretending to comply with conclave directives had already demonstrated its intentions. He said that waiting would only give humanity more time. 2 other species said nothing. They sat in their high seats and watched the room and kept their thoughts to themselves, which Voss noted and filed away for later. When the arguing finally slowed, Voss spoke. He said the matter was simple. He said that humanity had violated its probationary agreement by constructing an unauthorized military force. He said that the scale of the violation made negotiation inappropriate. He said that the conclave existed to maintain order in civilized space, and that a species which had hidden 300 warships behind the face of compliance was not a species that could be reasoned with. He called the vote. 7 species voted for action. The declaration was drafted in under an hour. It was clean and formal and written in the careful language the conclave used when it wanted to sound measured while doing something it had already decided to do. It stated that humanity had violated the terms of its probationary membership. It stated that the hidden military buildup represented a threat to galactic stability. It called on all conclave member species to contribute forces to a unified campaign. It used the word suppression twice and the word necessary 4 times. It was broadcast on all open galactic channels 40 minutes after the vote closed. Every species in known space received it at the same moment. In the command citadel beneath the mountains, the broadcast came through on the main screen at the center of the operations floor. Someone turned the volume up. The room went quiet. Everyone stopped what they were doing and listened to Elder Voss's heavy, unhurried voice read the declaration from start to finish. It took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. When it ended, the room stayed quiet for another moment, the way a room stays quiet after a loud noise, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone was deciding what came first. Gion was sitting at the head of the long operations table. She had been sitting there for the last 2 hours, working through logistics reports, making small notes in the margin of a printed map, drinking cold coffee without appearing to notice it was cold. She had not looked up when the broadcast started. She had listened with her eyes on the table, her pen resting between 2 fingers, perfectly still. When it finished, she did not move right away. Junho was standing 2 seats down from her. He had served under her for 11 years. He had seen her in situations that would have broken most people, long sieges of bad information, failed plans, the death of people she had been responsible for. He had watched her hold herself together through all of it with the same flat, controlled stillness that most people mistook for coldness. He knew it was not coldness. He had just never been entirely sure what it actually was. He watched her face now. He saw something he had not seen before. It moved across her face slowly, like light changing in a room when a cloud passes. It was not anger. It was not relief in the simple sense of the word. It was something deeper than that, the expression of a person who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally, after years and years, been allowed to set it down. She was smiling. It was a small smile. It did not reach loud, but it was real, and it was the most human thing Junho had ever seen on her face, and it made something loosen in his chest that he had not realized was tight. She stood up. She set her pen down on the table. She straightened her uniform, a single, practiced motion, both hands moving together down the front of her jacket, smooth and automatic. The room was watching her. Every person on the operations floor, every analyst and officer and technician, had turned toward her, not because they had been told to, because she was the kind of person that rooms turned toward. She looked at the main screen for 1 more second, then she looked at the room. She said 1 word. Finally. She said it quietly. She did not shout it or announce it. She said it the way a person says something they have been meaning to say for a very long time and are only now getting the chance. There was no anger in it. There was no celebration either. There was just a deep, settled, irrevocable certainty. Then she started giving orders. She told Junho to bring the full fleet to active status. Not combat alert, full active. Every ship, every system, every crew member at their post and ready. She told Wubin, over direct channel, that she wanted the unbroken moving within the hour. She told Sara to begin the first phase of the intelligence operation, the one they had been sitting on for months, waiting for the right moment. She told Tiho's wing to pull back from the outer patrol and form up with the second attack group. And then she turned to Hana Yu, who had been standing near the back of the room, quiet and still, watching everything. Hannah had been a diplomat for 16 years. She had shaken hands with Elder Voss 7 times and smiled at him each time and said things she did not mean in order to keep a peace that had never actually been a peace. She had done it because it was necessary, because Gion had asked her to hold the line and keep the channel open and buy time, and so she had, year after year, in that cold blue chamber with its high seats and its condescending silences. Gion looked at her and said it was time for one more transmission. Hannah nodded, she understood. The final diplomatic transmission from Earth was recorded in a small room off the main operations floor. Hannah sat in front of a plain camera in her full diplomatic uniform, her silver pin on her collar, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked at the camera for a moment before she began. She was not angry either. She had moved through anger a long time ago. What she felt now was something quieter and harder, a kind of clear-eyed, absolute honesty that had been waiting behind years of careful diplomatic language to finally come out. She said that on behalf of Earth, humanity acknowledged the Conclave's declaration. She said that humanity had heard every word. She said that for 200 years, humanity had asked to be treated as equals. She said they had asked in formal sessions and in quiet back-channel conversations and in every diplomatic language available to them. She said they had been patient. She said they had followed the rules. She said they had waited. She said the Conclave had chosen, every single time, to say no. She said that the Conclave had restricted human expansion while other species moved freely. They had capped human technology while their own continued to advance. They had extended the probationary period, not because humanity had failed to meet its requirements, but because a humanity that was permanently provisional was easier to control than a humanity that was full and equal and free. She said that humanity had one response to the declaration. She looked directly into the camera. She said whatever came next, the Conclave had chosen it, not humanity. The Conclave, with its votes and its directives and its 200 years of careful, deliberate control. This belonged to them. She said she hoped they were ready for what they had chosen. She ended the transmission. She sat in the quiet room for a moment after the camera light went off. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked back out to the operations floor. Outside, the fleet was already moving. Above the mountains, the sky was clear and dark and full of stars. The same stars that the Conclave had spent 2 centuries telling humanity it was not ready for. Humanity had decided, at long last, to disagree. The Conclave called it a suppression campaign. They sent 800 ships to the Vordon Passage, a long stretch of open space that served as the main approach corridor into humanity's outer territory. It was the obvious route, the logical route, the route that every Conclave tactical model identified as the correct point of entry for a fast, decisive push toward Earth. 800 ships was more than enough to break whatever defense line humanity could put up, punch through to the inner system, and end the campaign before it became a war. The fleet entered the passage in tight formation, shields up, weapons ready. They made it 40% of the way through before the first asteroid moved. It was not a small asteroid. It was a dense, dark rock roughly 600 meters across, and it had been sitting in the same position in the passage for 11 years, fitted with a drive system on its far side that no Conclave sensor had ever been pointed at long enough to find. There were 2 more behind it, positioned with exact, careful precision at intervals that Gion's team had calculated and recalculated over the course of 3 years. They were not ships. They were not missiles. They were mass driver platforms, rocks the size of buildings, accelerated to speeds that made the math uncomfortable, aimed at coordinates that had been locked in and waiting for a specific signal. Gion sent the signal from the operations floor without standing up. The Conclave fleet had no record of this weapon. Their tactical systems had no classification for it. By the time the first platform fired and the second and third followed 3 seconds later, there was not enough time to do anything useful with that information. The front third of the Conclave fleet was gone in under 2 minutes. Tiho let his wing in through the debris before the dust had settled. His hands were steady on the controls. His breathing was even. He had trained for this exact engagement pattern so many times that his body moved through it without waiting for his brain to catch up, rolling left, targeting, firing, pulling out, looping back. He was not thinking about the scale of what was happening. He was thinking about the next 3 seconds, and then the 3 seconds after that, which was exactly how he had been trained to think. His wingman said something over the channel, something short and breathless. Tiho said to stay in formation and keep moving. They swept through the passage and came out the other side, and the Conclave fleet, what was left of it, was already turning back. Jion did not celebrate. She noted the result, updated her projections, and moved to the next item. Junho watched her work and thought, not for the first time, that there was something almost frightening about the way she operated in the middle of a war. Not frightening in a bad sense. Frightening in the way that watching something work exactly as designed is frightening, a kind of clean, mechanical awe. He asked her once, late on the third night of the campaign, when the operations floor had thinned out, and it was mostly just the two of them and a handful of analysts left, how much of this she had planned in advance. She thought about the question seriously, which she always did. She never answered questions about strategy carelessly. She said she had planned what she could. She said she had written scenarios for every Conclave fleet configuration she could model, every approach route they might take, every resource they might commit. She said she had run each scenario until she found responses that worked, and then she had built the tools to execute those responses and place them where they needed to be. She said the rest was just humans being humans. Junho asked what that meant. She said it meant that the Conclave had spent 200 years studying humanity and had still managed to learn almost nothing useful about them. She said the Conclave saw a species that was emotional and unpredictable and difficult to manage, and they had treated those things as weaknesses. She said they had never understood that a species which felt things deeply and got angry and refused to accept what it was told was also a species that would work 20-hour days for 14 years to build a ship in secret. She said the same quality that made humans hard to control was the quality that made them impossible to stop once they decided on something. She looked at the map on the screen, blue markers for human ships, red for the Conclave. The red markers were thinning. The Murray Gambit ran on day 9. It was named after Murray O, a UEDD officer who had served under Jion 12 years earlier and had died during a training accident that should never have happened, in a facility that had been underfunded because the Conclave's resource restrictions had left Earth's military operating on margins too thin for proper safety. Jion had never said this publicly. She had written the name into the operation quietly, where only her senior staff would see it. A small, private accounting. The Gambit worked like this. Jion launched a direct strike toward a Conclave core world on the far side of their territory. A hard, fast push that looked exactly like the opening move of a major offensive. The Conclave pulled their reserve fleets from 3 different sectors to respond, stripping their supply chain corridors down to minimal cover. They moved fast. They were not slow or stupid. They simply did not know about Wubin's teams. 6 interdiction minefields went live simultaneously across the most critical jump corridors in the Conclave's logistics network. Wubin had positioned the deployment ships weeks earlier, sitting quiet and cold-running in empty space, waiting for the order. The mines were not designed to destroy ships. They were designed to make corridors impassable, dense, self-replicating fields that took weeks to clear even with full engineering resources. Wubin, watching the deployment confirmations come in one by one from the operations floor, said it was like strangling a river. You did not have to stop all the water. You just had to squeeze the right points. The Conclave's ability to resupply its frontline fleets dropped by more than half within 72 hours. On day 11, Sora released the file. It went out on every open channel available, the same channels the Conclave had used to broadcast its declaration of war. Every document, every internal communication, every directive written specifically to hold humanity back while other species moved forward. Every meeting where Conclave members had discussed humanity not as a civilization to be guided, but as a problem to be managed. The galactic community read it in silence. 3 neutral species issued statements within 24 hours. The statements were careful and diplomatic and did not commit to anything directly, but they said enough. They said that the documents raised serious questions. They said that the Conclave's account of events did not appear to match the record. 2 Conclave member species stopped sending ships to the front. They did not announce it, they simply stopped. Gion noted this on the map and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. The numbers said it for her. On the operations floor, the blue markers held their positions, steady and patient and everywhere, spread across the map like something that had been planned a very long time ago by someone who had never once doubted that this day would come. Which, of course, it had been. And she never had. 6 months after the Conclave declared war, Elder Voss sent a message asking for a ceasefire. It was not the kind of message he was used to sending. He had spent most of his life on the receiving end of requests, approving them or denying them, or letting them sit unanswered long enough that the other party got the point. He was not comfortable with the reversal. It showed in the language of the message, which was formal in the way that people are formal when they are trying to hide that they are afraid. 4 of the 12 Conclave species had already withdrawn from the coalition entirely. 2 of them had opened direct communication with Hana Yu and were speaking to her quietly, away from the rest of the Conclave, about what a different kind of arrangement might look like. The remaining 6 were still fighting, but their fleets were thinner than they had been, and their supply lines had never fully recovered from what Wu Bin's teams had done to them in the early weeks. Every engagement had gone the same direction. Every plan the Conclave had pushed forward had run into something that felt less like a military response, and more like a wall that had been standing there long before the war started, waiting to be found. Voss's message reached the asterisk unbroken while it was positioned 3 light-years from the Conclave's home system, not threatening the system, just present, just visible on every Conclave sensor at every hour of the day, a quiet and enormous reminder of how far things had shifted. Gion read the message alone, standing at the viewport in her small quarters, the stars outside cold and very still. Junho knocked and came in a few minutes later. He asked what she was thinking. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars. Then she said they needed to end it correctly. She said winning the war was one thing. She said what came after the war was the part that actually mattered. Junho asked what she meant. She turned from the viewport and looked at him. She said that the Conclave had spent 2 centuries building a system that kept certain species small and kept other species comfortable and called it order. She said that if humanity simply replaced the Conclave at the top of that system, nothing real had changed. She said the point was never to sit in the high seat. The point was to get rid of the high seat altogether. Junho looked at her for a moment. Then he said he understood. She said she knew he did. That was why she had kept him around for 11 years. It was the closest thing to a joke she had made in 6 months, and Junho held onto it for the rest of the day. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a small station orbiting an unremarkable star that belonged to none of the species present. Hana had chosen the location. She had a gift for that kind of detail, for understanding that the place where a thing happened carried its own meaning. Gion, Hana, and Sora walked into the meeting chamber together. The room was smaller than the grand assembly. The ceiling was low. The seats were arranged in a flat circle, no position higher than any other. Hana had specified this in the meeting conditions, and the conclave had agreed without argument, which said more about where things stood than any of their previous communications had. Elder Voss was already seated when they came in. He looked older than the last time Hana had seen him, in the way that people look older when something they believed in has stopped working. Several of his usual delegates were not present. The seats beside him had a thinned-out, diminished feeling. No one spoke for a moment after Jion sat down. Then Voss said that he wanted to discuss terms. Jion said that was good. She said humanity had 3. Voss said he was listening. She said the first term was the full dissolution of the probationary system, not just for humanity, for every species currently held under it, all of them completely, immediately, and permanently. No species would enter conclave space on a leash again. Voss said nothing. She said the second term was the restructuring of the conclave as a democratic body. Equal votes. No high seats. No elder species with veto power over younger ones. Every civilization, regardless of how long it had been traveling the stars, would carry the same weight in every decision. Voss's expression shifted. He said that was a significant change to a system that had existed for centuries. Jion said she was aware. She said the third term was a full public record. Every document Sora had already released, and more, a permanent, official, conclave-acknowledged account of every suppression tactic used against every species that had ever been kept small on purpose. Not just humanity. All of them. Broadcast to all known space, entered into the permanent galactic record, impossible to deny or revise or quietly bury later. The room was very quiet. Voss looked at her for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost most of its old weight. He asked why humanity was not simply taking control. He said they had the ships. He said they had won. He asked why they were not making themselves what the conclave had been. Jion looked at him. There was no anger in her face. There was not even satisfaction, not exactly. There was something steadier than that, the look of someone who had known the answer to this question for a very long time and was only mildly surprised that anyone still needed to ask it. She said that humanity had not fought to become what the conclave was. She said they had fought to make sure no one ever had to be what humanity had been. Voss looked at the table. He did not speak again for a while. He signed the terms before the end of the day. 3 weeks later, Tiho-Ri was sitting in his cockpit on patrol, engines at idle, drifting slowly along the edge of a newly opened trade lane between Earth and a former enemy species. Ships moved through it in both directions, human and non-human, cargo and civilian and research vessels, passing each other without flags or challenge or inspection. No checkpoints, no cap on what they were allowed to carry, no reminder of who had approved their right to be there. He watched them for a while. Then he opened a channel to base and asked, in a voice that was trying to sound casual and not quite managing it, whether this was what normal felt like. Junho's voice came back with a short laugh. He said to ask Jion. A beat of silence passed over the channel. Then Jion's voice came through, dry, quiet, unhurried. She said no. She said this was better. The trade lane stretched out ahead of him, open and unguarded and full of ships going wherever they chose. Tiho sat in the quiet of his cockpit and watched them pass, one after another, and did not say anything else for a long time. He did not need to. Some things did not need words. Some things just needed to be looked at, carefully and for as long as possible, so that they would be remembered correctly. This was one of them.